Show. The No Mickey Show. Yeah, clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The No Mickey Show. The No Mickey Show. The No Mickey Show. The No Mickey Show. No Miki Show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, faith fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The No Miki Show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the No Miki Show. It is Wednesday, January 12th, 2022. And if you don't know, if you haven't checked out the show before and you haven't heard us say this over and over, November is it's like 10 months away. And why does November matter? I am not letting this go. November are the elections, the midterms. And if you recall, a man named George W. Bush basically stole an election in 2000. And Al Gore didn't really fight back in the way that I think so many Democrats and progressives thought he could have and would have won. Al Gore lost his home state. Al Gore lost an election many people thought he would win, and the Democrats did very little to try to win back, even though they probably had the ability to do so. And then 4 years later, John Kerry. John Kerry was swift-boated by a guy who was a cheerleader who was not an actual military officer. John Kerry, of course, was a veteran of Vietnam. He testified against Vietnam, 50 years ago at this point. And somehow they manipulated the media into thinking that John Kerry was a liar and he wasn't a military hero because they knew at that time the Republicans needed to appear strong, and John Kerry couldn't appear stronger than George W. Bush. And once again, the Democrats lost by a narrow margin in Ohio. That was it. It was Ohio. And that led to their very thoughtful, strategic goal of taking over the entire country. The Koch brothers, of course, were on top of this, a decade and a half before George W. Bush got elected. But once George W. Bush got elected, even if it was by the tiniest of margins, they did everything they could by stacking the courts, taking over legislatures, and really sealing the deal for at least a decade. Except there was one thing. The Bushes did not get along with the far right. And the far right was taking advantage of the fact that the grounds had been laid by the Koch brother infrastructure and the Bushes being in office, the Bush being in office, meaning George W. Bush. And so they saw it as an opportunity. George W. Bush, let's just remind everybody, pre-Ellen, baseball games and pre-Michelle Obama embrace, George W. Bush was the least popular president of all time. So much so that Junior Senator Barack Obama could run for office as the anti-war candidate, the anti-Iraq war candidate in a primary against institutional figure Hillary Clinton. Okay? So this is a situation in which you had the least popular president of all time, George W. Bush, create an opening for Democrats to come in and win. And just in the nick of time, they chose John McCain, who was sort of sidelined because he was independent. He was not lockstep with the Republican Party at all times. And so they said, he's earned because it's about ranks in the Republican Party. Okay, we will put John McCain as our nominee because it's likely, based on historic trends, that we're going to lose. We might as well give him his moment. Okay? So they brought in John McCain, and then the economy collapses. And John McCain picks Sarah Palin. Perfect storm. And Barack Obama, of course, charismatic, and at that point had won the primary against Hillary Clinton on an anti-war message. He won the election. And we thought, all right, we'll get through this. We get through the economy. We will get through this. And of course, we know where it went from there. Barack Obama, of course, not only didn't just bail out Wall Street, but he pulled funds from the Democratic Party, and there was a shellacking. And the shellacking is the moment I want to come to. The shellacking were the midterm elections. Historically, but really not historically in the last 60, 70 years, it's more historically since 1992. Have the midterms been catastrophic? And I say that because the Democrats held the House for 30 years prior to Bill Clinton winning the presidency. So now we're expected in less than 11 short months to lose the House and the Senate because of historic trends. That's the excuse, historic trends. Well, historic trends prior to Bill Clinton winning the White House were that the Democrats just had the House at all times. They never lost it. They just had it. And sometimes they had the Senate, but more often than not, the Democrats were in power because the Democrats were there for working people. But somehow we are a more progressive, diverse country than ever, and we have no middle class left, and somehow the Democrats aren't able to keep their majority based on the principles that they fight for. So what I am here to share with you all today is we cannot rest on the Democrats. Yes, they're infuriating. And yes, the establishment, their leadership is completely asleep at the wheel and beholden to Capitol and Wall Street and the powers that be and their donors. But it doesn't mean that we need to rely on them. In 2017, as you guys know, I was on the Unity Reform Commission, and we spent 2 years traveling around the country, meeting with different party leaders, trying to figure out how to fix the Democratic Party. We issued a report. We got it voted on by the entire DNC. It won, and they did not institute any of our recommendations. And those recommendations primarily were, hey, maybe you should take your money and pull them away from 5 consultants and put them into state parties and build a pipeline of candidates and folks who can help out these campaigns, because that's what the Republicans have been doing for 40 years. We've lost unions. They're nowhere near what they used to be in 1978 since we banned them from the party. So now we have to do something more. And so what I'm saying to you, and I will continue to say, and this is the theme of our show, is the Proud Boys are running, the QAnon supporters are running, the Boogaloo Boys are running at the local level. This is much, much more than the Koch brothers and the Bush family dynasty. This is about the far right taking over. And if the establishment Democrats can't even get BBB passed when they have the House, the Senate, and the presidency, then it's time for us all to step up. If you've ever thought about running for local office, this is your time. Run for city council, town council, school board, state senate, assembly. It's much more achievable than the bigger. Congress is great, but Congress is stalled. If you want to run for Congress, please do so. But it's not just about bad Democrats anymore. It's about actually challenging these far-right members, because the Democrats are not present. They are not present in 50 states in this country. They don't have operational Democratic parties recruiting candidates and training them. So we ask you to run. And we are going to do whatever we can on our show and other shows to help inform you on how to run. We don't deserve to be going into the dark ages, but we can't sit here and say we do not have the power to do something. So that is the theme of this year. And very excited because today we have an incredible show. I think you all know that we started Solidarity Wednesdays. Solidarity Wednesdays are when we have our dear friend Ben Dixon on, who is the host of the Benjamin Dixon Show. I appear on his show at early in the morning, 8 a.m. every morning, Eastern on his show on YouTube and other platforms. And then he comes on at our show on Wednesday evenings when we go live at 8 Eastern. So he will be on our show in the next half. But first up, we have Amelia Pang. She is the author of Made in China, A Prisoner, and SOS Letter, and The Hidden Cost of America's Cheap Goods. And then for the panel today, we have Arun Chaudhary, who is the host of the committee program. And of course, he's worked in administrations, presidential administrations, and he is doing overseas work, movement work as well. So he has his ear on the ground as to what's happening with the fascists overseas, who are definitely making their rounds. We're going to have a great conversation with him in the second hour, but we're going to take a quick break, and we will be back with Amelia Pang. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. We are so honored to have Amelia Pang on. She is the author of Made in China, A Prisoner, an SOS Letter, and the Hidden Cost of America's Cheap Goods. She's an award-winning investigative journalist of Uyghur and Chinese descent. Her work has been published in the New Republic, Mother Jones, and the New York Times, Sunday Review, among many other platforms. Amelia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, I want to kind of take a step back and just get to just what's been happening with the Chinese government and the Uyghur population. I think there's been a lot of misinformation, probably strategically so, put out there, propaganda, I would even say, to confuse folks. But this is your dissent. I ask you, somebody from the community, to explain like what's been going on and why is it not more well known in the States?
Well, the rise of the concentration camps that are detaining Uyghurs in China today is closely tied with China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is a $1 trillion economic development strategy. It's this infrastructure project that connects China to the Middle East, connects China to Europe and West Asia. It's extremely, China has put a lot of investments in this project, and it's kind of too big to fail. And where the Uyghurs live, the Uyghur region, also known as Xinjiang, that is in Western China and Central Asia. So the Belt and Road, a key part of the Belt and Road goes through that area. So based on the history of the Chinese government's relationship with the Uyghurs, which hasn't been a good one because Uyghurs and other Turkic people in China are basically living as second-class citizens. It's hard for them to get jobs. If they go to a hotel and try to book a hotel, they might get turned away because they're not Han Chinese. These are things that are a common experience for Uyghurs in China. So the Chinese government is afraid of an uprising in the region, and there hasn't been any large-scale uprisings that could actually disrupt the Belt and Road Initiative. But because of that fear, the Chinese government started rounding up millions of Uyghurs into camps since 2016, 2017, which is really when you saw investments in the Belt and Road Initiative ramp up.
Okay, so let's just be very clear. So the Uyghur population, they overlap with the location of this initiative, like where they're expanding their investments. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. A turning point in terms of the spike of the camps happened in 2017 when China invested $66 billion in the infrastructure of that region for the Belt and Road Initiative.
And what does the Belt and Road Initiative do? What is their goal? Is it natural resources?
It's building these China-funded bridges like 5G networks and other major infrastructure projects. That region serves as a major transportation hub for the Belt and Road Initiative. So it's a huge logistical importance to China.
And when you say, okay, so the infrastructure is for trade purposes. So if there are natural resource exploration in other areas of the East, this is a region of transport solely.
Yes, it's a huge logistical importance. So that's why, if we have companies pulling out of that region, a region that China has made a lot of investment into setting up as an economic hub, then that could lead to some meaningful changes in terms of closing the camps.
Okay, so let's rewind just a little bit so we understand how these camps operate. When did the Chinese government start to crack down? Was it prior to this investment? Were there protests? How did this all originate?
There were some small-scale protests in a few years ago. There was a knife attack at one of the popular train stations that led to one of the crackdowns. But there hasn't been any evidence that there would be any large-scale protests that could disrupt their economic investments.
So this is just all to make sure there's absolutely no, why the Uyghur population? I mean, if there's no protests and they can go about business and continue to invest in infrastructure, why are they creating camps? Is there some other sort of nationalistic goal?
Yes, well, the goal is to have all populations in China, whether you're Tibetan, whether you're Uyghur, whether you're Kazakh, identify closely with the Chinese government. which means having a uniform identity and cutting ties with your own culture and your heritage, unfortunately.
And how successful has that been?
Through coercion, it has unfortunately been very successful. I mean, my own family tells that story. My grandmother was half Uyghur. She grew up in that part of the homeland and knew the culture, knew the language. But within just one generation, that was mostly lost. My family and my cousins to this day cannot speak the Uyghur language.
Wow.
We just don't have a connection with that part of our heritage.
And how large is the population, the Uyghur population in particular?
The latest, I don't have the latest numbers, but there's currently at least 1 million of Uyghurs in camps.
So in terms of these camps, what are the circumstances?
Well, you have to take a step back and look at the history of these camps. They've existed since the start of the Chinese Communist Party in the 40s. Initially, they were based off of Soviet gulags. The intent for these camps was to target political dissidents, class enemies, and these people were kept alive to serve as a source of free labor for the Chinese economy. And with each expansion of economic growth, there's been an expansion of camps. It used to be that these camps primarily targeted political dissidents, rights defenders. A lot of the student protesters from the 1989 Tiananmen Square protests ended up in these camps doing free labor for the global economy. And in recent years, we're seeing the latest iteration of these camps, the darkest iteration of these camps, which are the ones targeting Uyghurs and other Turkic people. And the intent behind these camps is really to destroy an entire ethnic group.
That's the sole intention, is just to destroy them entirely.
Based on the policies that we're seeing, yes.
And what type of international response has there been?
You're starting to see some strong international response. The U.S. government recently passed the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which would ban all goods from the Uyghur region from being imported into the U.S. And that's a pretty meaningful act to sign into law because, again, any way that we could hurt the financial investment that the Chinese government has made in the region really sends a strong message to convince them to lessen their hold on the camps. But it remains to be seen how well that can be enforced. There's a lot that our corporations can do. They can do better to track whether their products are being made in these camps. And the way that corporate audits are currently done are pretty weak in terms of detecting forced labor.
Okay, we're going to get to your story in a second because it's shocking. But what do you mean by that in terms of like the auditing of the supply chain auditing, or is it much more than that?
Yes, during my research for this book, I was shocked to find that the way that audits are designed, they're not really designed to detect forced labor at that factory. They're not designed to detect if that factory has a secret subcontracting relationship with nearby prison camps. There's a lot that corporations can do to find out this information, but they're not looking because nobody is really asking them to. Consumers are not demanding them to. It's not hurting their bottom line to continue sourcing from these types of forced labor facilities.
Wait, hang on, just to be clear. So a company, say like Apple, I'll just say Apple, right? So Apple hires so-and-so company to produce its product, to assemble its product. Just making this up. There's no truth. This is just my example. The company is in charge of assembling it might have a subcontractor that Apple is not aware of that might be forced labor. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. It's so funny you mentioned Apple because I actually went to China in early 2019 to visit these camps and follow the trucks that left these facilities to see which exporters they were working with. And they were working with an official Apple supplier. The address came up on Apple's official supply chain list. And when I reached out to Apple to ask what they were doing to discourage this factory from having a relationship with the forced labor facility, what kind of audits they conducted to detect this kind of information, they basically refused to give me any information. And to this day, this supplier remains one of their suppliers.
Interesting. So what companies are working in this region that you're aware of?
Well, so many. A great resource is the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. In early 2020, they released a pretty damning report that found 82 major global brands sourcing from factories that are known to be using Uyghur forced labor. And although this report came out a while ago in March 2020, not a whole lot has changed. Nike, for example, continues to use that supplier, even though there's hard evidence that that factory built a re-education night school for Uyghurs into that facility. Nike said that they've conducted audits and they don't believe there are any Uyghurs there anymore. But they've released no information about what kind of an audit they conducted to confirm there's no forced labor there. And I think that's something that needs to change.
Oh my goodness. So, you know, the story that you tell, and this is heartbreaking. In your book, you mentioned in 2012, an Oregon mother named Julie Keith opened up a package of Halloween decorations, and it basically changed her life. Can you explain what happened?
Right. The book opens up in October 2012 when this ordinary suburban mom is looking for Halloween decorations for her kid's party. As she goes through her storage shed, looking at all the decorations she's collected over the years, she comes across this unopened package of styrofoam gravestones that someone had gifted to her 2 years ago. It was one of those impulse purchases that someone had gotten from Kmart for no other reason other than the fact that it was really, really cheap. It was on clearance sale. But nobody had a need for it. It sat in storage for 2 years before she remembered to open it. And she was shocked to find an SOS letter had been waiting for the whole time. It was written by the forced labor in China who had made and packaged this very product in a very gruesome labor camp. The letter talked about how he was tortured, he was starved, he and the other forced laborers had to work 15 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they were paid less than $2 a month for all of this work. So my book aims to explore who are these types of forced laborers that land in this camp? Who is the author of this SOS letter? What were their experiences in the camps? What kind of products they manufactured? And more importantly, what are the loopholes in the way that our corporations try to make sure that they're doing sustainable sourcing? What are the loopholes that make it so easy for products manufactured in a gruesome labor camp to end up selling at a store like a Kmart in Portland, Oregon?
So what are some of these loopholes? How are they able to get away with this? I mean, I remember years ago, literally 25 years ago, I was in college, and I was in some political science class. It was like a 201 level or something. And this lawyer came in and spoke to us, and he was the lawyer in the case against, you might recall, Kathy Lee Gifford. She had like a workout line or clothing line for Kmart, I believe, if I'm correct. And she had been caught saying her goods were made in the USA, but it was really in territories. And when the loophole there was that, well, yes, it was made in the USA, but the territories did not have to follow the same standards that you have to in the United States, which of course are becoming worse and worse over the years. And this lawyer had effectively represented the workers, 25 years ago. And at this point, maybe it was 30 years ago, because he spoke to us 25 years ago. And I remember my entire worldview being shifted as a, 19-year-old college student, thinking this could happen. Like, what? There's a loophole. You go to the territories, you can get away with this. But this seems much darker and more complicated. And it seems like the industry has become much more sophisticated. So what loopholes did you find?
Well, historically, factory audits were mostly designed to protect the corporation rather than the worker. So when you have when the company receives bad press, like, hey, this factory is known to be using forced labor and they're in your supply chain, they can say, hey, we conducted an audit. It was an independent audit. We had a third-party audit. It was a great audit, and it confirmed that there's no forced labor in the supply chain and this information is wrong. It kind of protects the corporation, but rarely do these audits actually look into the things that you would need to look at to detect forced labor. For example, a standard audit that costs a couple $100 is usually a pretty cursory one that would only look for things like the cleanliness of the factory, how well the equipment is made, quality of the merchandise. It can't really detect something as complex as forced labor, especially if it's hidden through subcontractors. There's more comprehensive comprehensive and expensive audits called social compliance audits. They do take a deeper look at the wage documents and the factory's working conditions to make sure they're paying their workers well, and they're really subcontracting to where they're saying they're subcontracting to. But even social compliance auditors have told me it's really, really hard and maybe impossible for them to detect some of these more secret subcontracts to prison camps. They know that it's happening, but they can't really prove it based on what they're required to look for in the audits. So audits are often pretty limited in scope. But if companies start changing one or two things about what they look for in the audits, like let's say just saying that you write in the contract that you may send someone to follow the trucks that leave your facility to see if you're working with any prison camps nearby, that can send a very strong message to the Chinese suppliers saying, hey, they're taking this issue seriously. We're not going to work with prisons for this reason. And that could have a meaningful effect in terms of making the forced labor system less lucrative for the Chinese government. But since none of the Western brands that are sourcing from China are willing to do this, then it continues to be a hidden and very lucrative system.
Okay, so the part that I don't really understand is, so the audit is done by, it's U.S. audits over U.S. companies, right?
Right.
Okay, and then they subcontract to what I would assume is Chinese-based companies.
Well, a lot of the suppliers have subcontractors to other factories.
So say like Apple has a contract with the suppliers who are based in China. That's how it works?
Yeah.
Okay. And then because they're Chinese companies, you don't necessarily have to audit their finances as U.S. government. It becomes more complicated. But on top of it, like the workers' camps, if these contractors are subcontracting to workers' camps and the workers' camps are being operated by the Chinese government, this is essentially you're paying the Chinese government for free labor. And I mean, is the Chinese government making money off of this labor force that they're trying to essentially, keep out of keep out of protest or whatever their goal is?
Yes, they're absolutely making money. These people are paid significantly less than the local minimum wage, usually, if they're paid at all. They're a very lucrative source of free labor.
For the Chinese government?
Mm-hmm.
Does the Chinese government need it?
No, but if they're going to be silencing and arresting these people anyway, they from their point of view, they might as well make them work. So all kinds of detention centers, whether it's an official prison wherein somebody has received a sentence, or even a drug detox center or a pretrial detention center. There's so many different types of detention centers in China. They all contain manufacturing facilities, and they all have relationships with a lot of exporters.
So in terms of the oversight from the U.S. government, and we're talking about the IRS is doing the audits, or is it others that are doing the audits?
Actually, it's auditing companies that do the audits. So they could be based in Hong Kong, but they probably they do quality audits if you pay for certain kinds of audits to be done.
So the company has to decide whether or not to do it. It's not some sort of like, okay, got it.
Yes.
Right now, in terms of crackdown and pushback, other than the UN, what is the US China has become a significant, I don't know if adversary is the right word, but at least under the Trump administration, they were adversaries, but now under the Biden administration, he's obviously called out China extensively, but what's to be done? Is there Nancy Pelosi has throughout the last 30 years been very, thoughtful, and she's not perfect, but thoughtful about the human rights situation in China. Does that mean that there's something that's going to happen?
I think under the Biden administration, actually a lot got done. They passed the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which was a really big deal. It bans all products that are likely made by forced labor from that region, a region with very high risk of forced labor, from coming into the U.S. That was a meaningful piece of legislation, but I think it's not enough to do that because enforcement is hard. What's lacking is corporate accountability. A lot of companies, like Nike, for example, on their website, they say they don't directly source their cotton or raw materials. So which essentially is saying, because they don't know where their cotton comes from, it could be coming from Xinjiang, a region with a very high risk of forced labor. But they're not tracking it, and nobody is really making them track it.
And so what's next? What could be done?
I think in addition to all of the policy changes that are happening, we also need consumers to step up and look into your favorite brands that you enjoy shopping from. My book, Made in China, is about ultimately about the small actionable steps that the average consumer can take to move the needle and push our favorite brands to do better in terms of deterring our factories from using forced labor. Start by going to your favorite brand's website and see what kind of a statement they've made about the Uyghurs and about Xinjiang. See if they're willing to say they know where their raw materials are coming from and they're not using forced labor. A lot of companies aren't quite willing to reveal that level of detail, which I think is a part of the problem. You don't know where they're sourcing from. You don't know what they're doing to make sure they're not using forced labor. And that means there's no accountability.
Do you have a list of like a, dirty list of bad actors for consumers to at least be aware of?
I was just looking at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute's list of 82 companies that were found using Uyghur forced labor. This is based on a lot of hard evidence, including the domestic Chinese media reports that documented the workers in these programs and showed them on TV. So I would say that's a good resource for.
We'll put that in the information. Amelia, fascinating, super interesting, and thank you so much for sharing so much about the situation with the Uyghur population and just how intertwined it is with our lives on a daily basis, and what can be done. Check out Amelia's book. It is out right now. It's called Made in China: A Prisoner, an SOS Letter, and the Hidden Cost of America's Cheap Goods. She, of course, is a reporter, and she's appeared in places like the New York Times and so many other places like the New Republic and Mother Jones. Thank you so much for joining us. Go check out her book. As it says, well-researched, and we'll go back. Let's put that quote back up there so you can read it. Sorry, David. Well-researched and reported book that reads like a detective story. That's my favorite, detective stories. So great job.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. And take care. All right, we will be right back after this short break. Hello and welcome back to the Nomi Key Show. I am here live in Puerto Rico, San Juan. You guys all know that I'm doing this documentary here, and it is so lovely. And I'm going to call this the calm before the storm because we're about to walk into a crazy year. I want to mentally prepare everybody for what is going to happen if we don't. It's like all hands on deck. It's all hands on deck. We have got a situation in which the Democrats, they know exactly what the problem is. I mean, that I think is what's different now. We know before Donald Trump got elected, it was like, oh, our strategy's better. But now everybody knows their strategy's not better and they're barely doing anything and they're not flexing their muscles. And Joe Manchin is the president and yada, 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 yada. But like, they can't blame the left because they're not actually operationalizing. They're not out there recruiting candidates at the local level. They're not fighting the Koch brothers. They're just like, left people are bad. That's not the case. We know working people have suffered more during COVID, have suffered more in the last 15 years. And we have a shrinking middle class. And I think we're at the stage now where we just cannot rely on someone to save us. We just have to take them on. We have to take the Koch brothers head on. We have to fight locally. But when the Democratic Party, the big Ds, don't do their job, don't put money into recruiting candidates and training candidates, sit there and say, well, who's going to do it? So I am very proud. I am a part of Matriarch organization. Matriarch recruits working class women who are interested, thinking about, are in office, are running. 2022 is a huge year. So if you know of a working class woman who is interested in running for office, has thought about it, wants to entertain it, is running right now, or is actually in office, we are doing a training, and it is a different type of training. It is a training specifically geared towards women who are working class. And that is because there are more obstacles. Women already face more obstacles than men do. Sorry to break that to you guys. But they also, if they're working class and progressive, they face major institutional barriers. They're told, oh, hey, we're not even going to look at your campaign until you raise $250,000. Well, who has a bunch of rich people in their Rolodex to raise that money? If you don't come from wealth and if you don't know wealth, it's harder to become quote unquote viable. And so we at Matriarch do not assess candidates based on their wealth or their access to wealth, but we support you because of who you are, what you represent, your connection to the community, and how you're going to fight. We don't care if you're from a Democrat plus 15 district running against a bad Democrat, or if you're running in a Republican district that's working class. We believe that the entire country is on the table. We have to fight in every district. We have to fight at the local level because that's what the Republicans do. That's what the far right does. And so if you're interested in running, here's the spoiler. You don't have to raise $2 million. If you're running for school board in most of this country, or for city council or town council in most of this country, you don't have to raise as much money. And we will help you understand how to get there sooner, how to get the big endorsements sooner, how to knock on doors, how to create a budget, who to hire, how to become the best candidate you can be. And spoiler alert, the candidates have to be the candidates. So you need your team to do their thing, and the candidates need to do their thing. So on January 29th, we are doing a free training. Free. That doesn't happen. You don't have to get on a flight. You don't have to get a hotel room. You don't have to take off work because it's Saturday, unless you work on Saturdays. So we hope you can make it. It's a full day event. Some of the best people in the industry are going to be teaching you guys, sharing their stories, sharing their secrets about how to run an effective campaign. And if you're running already, or if you're in office, bring your senior staff because they might learn some stuff too. This is not just geared to candidates, it's geared towards staff members as well. This is free. Go sign up. Go to matriarchpack.com. We have the link in the bio. Click on the training program. Put in your name. This is going to change the space. This is our first of the year, and it's a huge one. We have names like Jane McAlevey is going to teach us how to organize. What? We have Cori Bush's former campaign manager. Cori Bush is, of course, one of the founding members of Matriarch and got elected after running multiple times and learning the lessons and really not giving up. There's other surprise guests. You're going to learn how to create your narrative, how to build coalitions, how to fundraise when you come from a working class background, how to, run for office while holding work, while having kids, while being in a pandemic. Other trainings don't do that. They say, open up your phone and see if you can raise $500,000 or $250,000. Well, guess what? Spoiler alert, you're not going to be able to do it unless you have that money. We will give you the tricks. You can be competitive without playing their game. We have our own game, and we're going to teach you how to do it. So join matriarchpack.com. It is a free training. Very excited. We have a lot of great partners and folks who have committed to making sure that this training is free for as many working class women as possible. And we are inclusionary, so all women, and of course, your staff members as well. Go check it out at matriarchpack.com. We will be right back after this tiny little break for Solidarity Wednesdays with Benjamin Dixon, right after a brief break. Hello and welcome back to the Nomi Key Show. It is Wednesday, which means it's Solidarity Wednesday. This is a new thing we're doing in 2022 because this is the moment we really need to exercise our solidarity. The right does it. They organize, they get hyper local. They've been reading all the organizing principles of the left and like, oh, gee, we can do that too. And then we can make the left eat each other alive. We're not going to play into that because the stakes are too high. The stakes are incredibly high right now, and we're just going to keep reiterating that over and over again. No inner party fight, inner leftist fight is worth what's going on right now. We have to focus our energy. And our dear friend, Benjamin Dixon, we have created a partnership with Ben. There he is. He hosts the Benjamin Dixon Show. I was on a show today at 8 a.m. Eastern.
Yes, you were.
And
yes,
you're
you were.
on
Thank
at
you so
8
much. Thank you so much for getting up so early and for me staying up so late because I'm a dad now, so I'm asleep by 8 p.m. usually.
I'm like in both lands right now. Like my age has definitely. I remember when I was really young, my parents were like, "When you get older, you're gonna wake up early, and as soon as the sun comes up, it's through my windows." And I'm like, "That's it.
That's
go
exactly right." I'm up at 4:30, 5 o'clock every morning now, so it's out of control.
You beat me by a lot. So okay, Ben, I'm so excited that we're doing this. This is our second week on our show, and we were on your show today, and it was almost like we had no time to discuss, the most important matters of the world. But luckily, we're doing this every week, twice a week.
Right. That's right.
But I want to lean into some of the stuff that we started out. We were talking about labor on your show today. And if you haven't checked it out, please go check out the Benjamin Dixon Show. You can see we were talking about what's going on with Starbucks workers right now. And of course, the Amazon workers trying again in Bessemer. But we also hinted on what the right has done so well.
That's right.
They have been experimenting, and it's not even an experiment because they have the capital, because they have the media. They're and of course, many times they've had folks in power. They're supporting them. They have laid the bricks over the last 40 years for where we are today. And I say this on the show a lot, but I want to reiterate it. 3 weeks ago, the New York Times printed a story saying the Proud Boys who were in Charlottesville, the Proud Boys who are like hitting people on the Upper East Side and think this is a game. Gavin McInnes, who is he's the founder of the Proud Boys. I've debated him before. He thinks misogyny is cool. He thinks racism is cool.
Yeah.
These guys and the QAnon supporters and the Boogaloo Boys, hard to tell the difference between all these folks. They're running for school boards and town councils. Meanwhile, the Democrats, who, spoiler alert, still haven't decided to put their money, more money than ever they've ever raised, into local party. They're not recruiting candidates. They're not recruiting consultants. So we're in a situation now where they're taking over the map and there is no defense. Like, we're at war, but are we really at war? Like, there's no war if there's not another side fighting.
That's right. That's right. In a war, you have to have two sides. You have to have two belligerents. And right now, it's only the conservative movement that's actually organized in a meaningful fashion. They're not only organized on the national level, but like you pointed out, they're localized on the state level and the local level. But they're also organizing on the global level. I mean, you mentioned that they have the resources. They do. They have the capital. They have the capital sufficient enough to make any cornball, untalented hack famous and give them a platform, because they need people out there constantly pushing their lies and their propaganda so that they can maintain their type of solidarity. Their type of solidarity is maintained by how much propaganda they can spend, how much money they can spend on that propaganda, and how many people will believe their lies.
Do you have a sense of you live in Georgia. I grew up in Western New York, which is Trump country. Notably, the town just close to where I grew up was a few years ago labeled the most racist town in America. Cheektowaga, New York. Not my town, I'll be fair, but it was definitely their claim to fame. And then Arizona, I've spent a lot of time in. And so, when you get outside of, you've lived in New York, when you get outside of New York and LA and Chicago even, and you get outside of DC and Miami, you start to see it is more there than people are aware of. And the Republicans tap into this and they say like, well, Nancy Pelosi is an East Coast liberal, and and when you watch The View, the liberals are all Hollywood liberals. They're not like, progressive working class people or organizers. It's Hollywood actors that are representing the left. And part of like my concern is there's actually a misunderstanding of what the right is and how they're organizing, partly because we haven't been investing in the rest of America, and what's portrayed in the media is the coastal elites. It's not even coastal, it's like the big city elites. And so I mean, do you feel like folks really, you're there, you see it every day, like, do you feel like folks really get the texture of what's happening on the ground?
I don't think a lot of people, yes, I think they get it. I think if you sit down with anybody for more than 5 minutes and they have an opportunity to actually have these kind of conversations, they see it. I mean, they see it in their paychecks. They see it in the lack of paychecks. They see it in the lack of housing opportunities. They see it in the lack of social safety nets. They see it in the complete abandonment of the American people in COVID-19. So, and then on the local level, they do see, right, that there is a stark contrast between what is happening in their real day-to-day lives and what we see on television and who is on the news, who's running the media, right? They're wealthy millionaires who are running these millions, some of them billionaires, owning media corporations. And so the majority of those, the vast majority, and I don't care what anyone else says, like I even think MSNBC to that extent plays its own role in supporting this system. And that is the fight, Nomiki. Like we keep talking about it, but the solidarity is so crucial because we're up against billionaires who have entire media apparatuses that have the ability to point out what you just pointed out all day, every day. They're pointing out to people who understand that something is wrong. They see it, they feel it, they feel it in their bodies, in their minds. But then when they look on the television, they don't see anybody who looks like them, anyone who's struggling. They don't see anyone who's a working class. They don't see and so, it's something that's regularly exploited by the Republicans.
Well said. Regularly exploited by. So this is a great pivot because we all know who Steve Bannon is. Steve Bannon was a senior advisor to the Trump election, and he is no newbie to politics. He actually was a Hollywood producer, which is really important because he understands markets. He was one of the Seinfeld producers. He knows this industry very well. He knows the Republicans very well. He's also extremely charming, which is horrifying. When you watch him, you're like, it doesn't look like he's a charming guy. And then you see him and he's very, very good on his feet and charming. Steve Bannon, there was a documentary that I've watched at this point, I think like 6 times because I want to study it. Let me rewind. I was in 2016. I was at SiriusXM hosting a show on the Progressive Channel 127. It was a nightly show from 9:00 p.m. to midnight. There were only a few people hosting shows that late. The other person down the hall from me on the Conservative Channel was Steve Bannon. I was a Bernie person. He was a Trump person. And it was sort of like weirdly comical at the time because it's like we both got what was happening in the country and like who was going to win. And I legitimately at that point before the election did not think that they would have won.
That's right. Yeah.
And here we are. Steve Bannon, I think he's extremely tied into the Trump world still. Just because he was distanced does not mean that he's not part of it. He went out before the EU elections in 2018, I believe. He went to Europe and he decided to bring leaders from all over the world together, including Representative Gosar from Arizona and Viktor Orban, of course, from Hungary, and folks in the Brexit world, and leaders, Modi in India, and Duterte, and and he listed all these folks, and he thought, we have to create a global strategy. That same year, he created a training camp, true story, in Italy, in a monastery, to recruit more candidates to win the EU elections. But it was never, he lost elections, but it was never about that. It was about the ideas. And this is where I feel like the Democrats don't get it. They think, well, if we're not going to win, we're not going to invest. The Republicans are like, we don't care about winning. We care about investing. Because when we plant the seeds, Doesn't go away.
That's right. That's right. Republicans are making a long, they constantly, and put it like this, we are now on the receiving end of about a 50-year strategy to roll back Roe versus Wade, right? This didn't happen overnight. They've been planning this every day since the original decision from the Supreme Court, and they invest money in it, and they have no problem taking 5 decades to get their victory. This is the same thing that we're seeing now. We're seeing conservatives make investments in high schools, in colleges, in trying to capture the young generation, because they know in order to win the future, they've got to win some young votes. They have to win the minds. They have to win the minds of these children before they're shaped by actual fact and truth and history.
And experience too. I mean,
that's right.
They're going to Gamer. I mean, Gamergate was sort of like the origins of how YouTube operates, right? The gamer community was caught up in this misogynistic experiment. It was a horrible, horrible situation. And then much of the gamer community, which was predominantly male, white male, young white male, moved into other spaces, YouTube and Twitch, et cetera, et cetera. And it really does dictate how a lot of the left, at least, or younger media, the conversations are held. So Bannon is, he's been under investigation. He's been arrested. He has had a lot of stuff thrown at him. But the guy this documentary was jarring because, on like the 4th time I watched it, I started zooming in on all the books he was reading. And I'd love to talk about this maybe next week. We can go into this in a little bit more depth. Some of the books are like really effing weird, like spiritual and like studying the icons of history and mythology and how mysticism works. And turns out, there are podcasts that talk about how when he was in the military, he was studying transcendental meditation, and he was trying to understand how, and this is nothing new, by the way. This is not a Steve Bannon thing. That, going back to the early 1900s, you saw a lot of the billionaires, the Henry Fords of the world, being like, "If you will it, it will come." And they did this whole mind, spiritual. I mean, there you go. You've got him reading a book right there. And he was quoting Lincoln there, who in that part of the documentary, where he was basically quoting the moment where he needed to rise up. And this is not new, though. I mean, we kind of have made it very data driven and taken out the human component. But whether you're Steve Bannon or the first president of Mexico, who was into mysticism but was on the left, I mean, this is not new to politics. But he has really decided he's going to capture it. And we see this in the and of course I'll lead to you in a second, but we see this now with the anti-vax movement. They're really preying on a lot of spiritual folks. That's
right. At the risk of falling too deeply into that particular conversation, Steve Bannon, along with many Republicans, have a firm conservatives, reactionaries, and they have a firm belief in a higher power that they believe should service them by right of domination. They believe that by right of conquering Western civilization, conquering Earth, that the higher power that they believe in must now acquiesce to them. And so, I mean, it's a rabbit hole. I don't necessarily disagree with all of the mysticism parts, because I've read some of the same books and I can understand the allure and I get it. But they're doing it on the side of fascism. So I need all the new age people who get into that kind of stuff, and you might even mess with a couple of other substances. Please understand that everyone who rubs the crystal stones, they're not sharing the same frequency with you folks. And Steve Bannon's frequency is on pure bigotry and hatred.
It's so interesting you say it, because so I'm in Puerto Rico right now, and we've been doing this documentary, and it's a big part of it. It's colonization. You talk about indigenous community has been completely wiped out by the American, 200 years ago, Spaniards and then Americans, and you go back and you look at some of these texts from 1942, and the guy who was Times Person of the Year was writing texts in Puerto Rico about, they were experimenting on Puerto Rican people. And now you've got the Bitcoin people and the folks who are taxed, and they're all part of this spiritual community.
Yes.
And they're here for tax breaks. And I just read an article. Oh my God. I read an article. One of these Bitcoin bros who's a billionaire said, well, I took magic mushrooms and it changed my life and I understood Bitcoin finally. And that is how I became a Bitcoin billionaire. And they quoted Peter Thiel, who of course is not a great guy. He was a libertarian. And Peter Thiel said, he was that Bitcoin billionaire was always very bright. But then this guy says he's part of this Bitcoin Puerto Rican community where they, do yoga and they meditate. And I am one of those people. And I'm like, no.
That's right.
It's not about your get rich scheme.
That's right. Thank you.
They're using it as a tool, just like they used workers as a tool to break in.
I've got bad news for them. It's completely impossible for them to achieve the level of ascension that they believe that they can seek after without sacrificing the ego. It's funny because their first step after taking a couple magic mushrooms or even the frog venom is, oh my God, empathy. The first thing that they come across on their journey of self-exploration is empathy. A lot of them haven't even gotten that far, no matter how many drugs they use. So I'm not particularly worried about the spiritual aspect because I don't think they have it in them because they are the dominating force. They are the oppressors on the international stage. It's like the narrative of Pharaoh in the Bible. Pharaoh hardened his heart and did not, this is the same thing with them. They don't have the capacity to see the empathy that's necessary and the sacrifice of their personal ego to actually ascend. So keep doing all the drugs you want, guys, until you stop being a dick. Nothing's going to change for you. You might get rich, but you're not going to get that spiritual ascension that you are doing so many drugs to reach.
I'm so curious if it's really about spirituality. Hey, Ben, do you have like 5 more minutes? Can I bring in Arun? Because I'd love to get Arun's thought on this because I know he's got a lot of thoughts
at your
on
disposal.
Steve Bannon.
All right.
Arun Chaudhary is, of course, the host of the committee program. Let's bring in Arun because I feel like Arun got a lot of thoughts about Steve Bannon.
Steve Bannon.
Yeah, we're talking about the spirituality.
He came right out of prison and all of a sudden he looked really good, but in that way that people look really good kind of right before they die when they have, what's the rich person disease from like that, a consumption or what was that one, Was
it affluenza?
Like they would say you look really angelic before you died. And so this is my thing. I was like, he looks good. But then I saw a picture of him recently and oh boy.
The guy drinks like kombucha and like I watch this stuff. He's been on a diet, which means
no. I am the one. Just to catch you up on this, please, Ben. I am one who just thinks that that Steve Bannon was kind of the one whispering to Trump in the way that made Trump so effective in 2016, and that may be hard for him to replicate in a kind of reelect situation because Bannon's the one he knows how to run to the left of the center. Every time there's that opening, he does it. And so I as much as we admire the monsters, I think he does a really good job at framing and has made and was that special spark.
I feel like Bannon has moved on from Trump. I mean, dare I say it? Like everyone else is like, oh, Trump's going to run again. He might, doesn't matter. Bannon's like, I don't care if he runs again or not. I've got a first choice, second choice, third choice, but I also have an army that's running all over the world and fascism is going to rise up and there's no allied force that's going to save anyone. No, maybe?
No. I was going to yield the floor, but I feel that exact same thing, Nomi. I really do believe that Trump is now expendable. They are starting to distance themselves enough because they need the anti-vax community to continue with their coalition. And the minute he came out and said the vax works, well, I mean, they really put their fangs out on him.
How's it feel? So Ben, just so you know, Arun has been doing international work, even though he's an American. He's an American, guys. He's an American.
Don't worry. Whatever you heard.
Don't worry.
This is where it starts, Naomi. Thank you. This is that my life is now. You know what I mean? Yeah, there's going to be mugs and things and Bannon and oh God.
Hey,
he's
Arun,
Steve Bannon of Europe.
Pleasure being on a panel with you, my friend. Good to connect
totally.
With you.
So Arun, like, you've been working in Europe, you've been doing the anti-Bannon crusade. Like, what's your vibe right now? I mean, is the movement working fast enough? Is Bannon still?
No, the vibe's not great. The vibe's not great. I think I was mentioning last time, like, sort of new fronts open up all the time in the war on fascism in Europe. Slovenia is now sort of on a knife's edge of becoming another illiberal democracy within the EU. I mean, the kind of backwards progress that we see happening. I was just there speaking with folks and. it's sort of shocking and scary what can happen. And the places where the center left and the left are fighting are places where they should win easily. And one could, point towards the 2020 results as being that, right? You're like, yay, kind of looking in the tea leaves. That's the same when you look around Italy at places like Emilia Romagna, elections in places like Toscana, and sort of the slimming majorities for traditionally center left and left parties. It looks like it looks like we're going into the Empire Strikes Back section of the trilogy right now from a European stance.
And and what does that mean, like on the ground? Because obviously elections run a little bit differently, but is there like
that means France is for sure an actual monarchist versus an actual fascist. And the one exciting weird thing that happened, normally you have like, a Bernie type, right? Mélenchon, right. Some sort of exciting progressive like pops in and does something relatively interesting. No. Now the person who popped in was to the right of Le Pen, who was interesting for a few weeks and they got rid of. Yeah, Zemmour, who was a charming fellow. Yeah.
And is part of this because the left, center left has completely obliterated the left?
There's a bit of that, but it's just people don't get along. People won't play ball. I want to give credit where credit's due. Anne Hidalgo, who's the mayor of Paris and was the candidate from the socialists who, don't get too excited, Americans. They are like the traditional, very centrist sort of left party. But she said, I would like to participate in a primary, which is something that some Bernie French organizers, but out of Bernie world had started to organize. She said, I want to participate in that. I think that if the Greens, the communists, the socialists, if everybody, the civic left, which is a thing sort of in Europe, you have these people who are part of the center left, but don't identify with any party, but have civic associations that they can be in. If we all do a primary, and pledge to come together, that's a good job. The thing on the right, they don't have to do a spiritual primary because they have like a money primary, right? There's somebody who can throw enough money at something to make problems go away, even personal problems between people. It just takes some money.
Okay, so real quick, and Ben, like if you have any questions, please feel free to jump in. But like, I'm curious. Okay, so the right is rising in Eastern Europe, and you have Russia and Ukraine and all this shit happening right now over oil and pipelines. But fundamentally,
and 100,000 troops on a border, within 100 kilometers of Kiev. I'm actually sort of in Germany. I don't know why people aren't talking about it on the streets. Like that's a train ride from here.
How far?
Just across Poland. So probably 12 hours.
Wow.
So I mean, this leads. Actually, let's talk about the tension in Ukraine right now.
Ukrainians are welcoming 2022 by preparing for a possible Russian invasion, digging new trenches by hand in the frozen earth. Lined by minefields, the trenches already stretch for miles across eastern Ukraine. Crude defenses that have changed little since World War I. Maxim, a Ukrainian soldier, says he'll fight to the end. But of the talks, he adds, my opinion is wars have always been resolved through diplomacy. We expect that our leaders will solve these issues. Maria, a forward scout, didn't see her 4-year-old son for Christmas and may not for many months to come. Hopefully, on the other side, they love their families just like we do and don't want to see bloodshed and death, she says. Russia has also moved in missile launchers and this huge clearing vehicle that can cut a path through forests for columns of tanks. On Sunday, Secretary of State Blinken said he doesn't expect any breakthroughs ahead of key talks between the U.S. and Russia.
If Russia commits renewed aggression against Ukraine, I think it's a very fair prospect that NATO will reinforce its positions along its eastern flank.
To de-escalate and convince Russia to pull back, the United States is willing to make concessions. U.S. officials say they're willing to discuss scaling back military exercises near Russia if Russia reciprocates with its military drills, not deploying offensive missiles in Ukraine, and broader missile control agreements across Europe.
So this is, it's alarming. And looping in with our previous conversation about just the right rising up simultaneously. So when you have the right rising up and the center left, or more establishment left that's been in control in many of the Western democracies, liberal democracies around the world, really weak right now, and holding the far left, the worker left, down. are we in a place where, I mean, is this as alarming as it seems from the U.S. fundamentally in numbers?
It's more alarming than anyone's even willing to admit. It's more alarming than anyone's even to admit because it is so messy, and the absence of anything has led to vacuums on both sides where, like, I mean, you're talking about far right. We've allowed the far right to co-opt portions of the opposition. The far right is in charge on the other side. You know, it's becoming almost sort of a Syria situation, like in terms of looking for like moral outcomes, right? Like it's like,
Yeah, if you don't mind, I want to ask you if you could connect the dots for people who are listening with the far right, the global reactionary movement, and what's happening in Ukraine, because it seems to me that there would be more of a direct connection with that pan-reactionary, that global cabal. I hate to use that word, but it is. They're squatting up on a global level. How does this fit into that paradigm?
Right. So sort of the illiberal democracy, right, which Orban brilliantly has sort of branded what he's doing in Hungary. But this sort of bubble of illiberal democracy inside of Europe finds itself in natural ally with Putinship. But with Putinship, no, whatever Putinship stands for, with Putin, right? It's like there's a natural ally there, but it's sort of one-sided friendship. You know, it's like you have a large regional power and a somewhat international power in Russia who looks for trouble and can support these things, but they don't actually hold the same ideology necessarily. They don't have ideology. Right. Like the reason that's why it's so hard to like this Ukraine thing and why it's so unfortunate we're sending pistols to fight missiles, as you saw in the clip. It is because Putin is just basing this on, is this going to cost my country more than I want to do this? Right. Like I want to do this. I want the power. I want to show what I can do. I'd like to conquer something. Nobody gets to conquer anything anymore. Maybe I'll get to conquer something. That's exciting. I've done everything else. And so it's like it's so looking for sort of an ideological reasoning of it is why he and Lavrov laugh their way through all these meetings they have, because their objective is just to get the next piece of the puzzle in place to do the things that they want. And so they have this sort of network of anyone who finds themselves in opposition to whatever, you might call kind of the establishment consensus, on Earth, finds a friend, a natural friend there. And reciprocates. But what's interesting and confusing and just makes the situation, morally more murky and richer is that the traditional far right used to really organize in Ukraine. And this is why you have a lot of disagreement and people getting fights on Twitter. And they're like, no, the Ukrainians are the real Nazis. And it's like, we don't actually have to like figure out who's the closest to the Nazis. If you play that game in Germany, the AfD, who's the far right party, are like 4 steps away, and the Liberal Party, who are one of the ones in power, are only 1 step away. Yikes. So it's sort of a silly game to be like, how many Google hits till I get to the Nazis do I want to like throw you in? There is, I think, people who are, in the small sense of like the letters in the world, illiberal and liberal, cosmopolitan and acosmopolitan, tolerant and intolerant. And it's sort of more primal than our traditional left-right spectrum.
That's right.
Gives us room for, which right at the end of the day is just the mean girl seating chart from the French Revolution. Why we still use this thing is sometimes beyond me.
Final thoughts, Ben, go for it.
The fact that you just slammed the entire left-right paradigm properly as the mean girls for the French Revolution. I've got nothing more to add. Nomi, thank you so much for having me. And
you're the best. Thank you.
I think I would love to hear more of this conversation. And
let's do this again soon.
We're doing it every Wednesday. It's okay, guys. We'll make this happen. Ben, thank you for joining us. It's sticking around a little bit later. The conversation just obviously spilled over. So thank you to Ben Dixon. We're doing Solidarity Wednesdays every Wednesday. And Arun Chaudhary, of course, the host of the mini program extraordinaire, with his scarf on today. Because
not only is it a great scarf, this is handmade by the free peoples who support the EZLN.
Look at that.
In the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico.
Oh my God. You got it down there, or you?
Yeah.
And the cat just perfect timing. Commercial break.
Come on, Golda.
Come on, Golda, what you doing there? So, I mean, this is great that you're mentioning this, and I do want to, David pulled up this clip. Putin is unlikely to invade Ukraine despite overheated U.S. rhetoric, says Nina Khrushcheva. Let's play this clip because...
Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm convinced by that.
Let's get to that in a second, because this is very confusing for the U.S. audience, because you're getting one layer of frankly propaganda, and that's okay. It doesn't mean it's bad. It's just propaganda, no matter what. Whoever's throwing the propaganda out is throwing out the propaganda. But I think it's hard for folks who are not in these universes to understand what's real to believe. And I'll ask you a question related to that. Let's play the clip.
For more, we're joined in Moscow by Nina Khrushcheva, professor of international affairs at the New School, co-author of In Putin's Footsteps, Searching for the Soul of an Empire Across Russia's 11 Time Zones. She's also the author of The Lost Khrushchev, Journey into the Gulag of the Russian Mind. She's the great-granddaughter of the former Soviet premier, Nikita Khrushchev.
As for Ukraine, it is a little bit of a complicated story because it's very unclear exactly what the Russian idea is to have all these troops on the border with Ukraine. I am not of a school of thought that is especially, I mean, I know that is prevalent in the United States, that Putin is going to invade Ukraine. I think it is a bit of an information attack, as the United States kept saying, especially all the media and quoting Blinken and quoting Victoria Nuland, who's responsible for Russia and Eurasia, saying that, if and so, and we think that they will invade and therefore we'll punish them in this very severe manners. Russians are keeping the troops, from my point of view, as they say, to prevent potential Ukraine government encouraged by the West and the Western military support from trying to take the territories annexed in 2014 by force. And I'm actually tending to trust Putin on that, because I don't think he wants a large bloodshed. I don't think he wants to take Kiev, as many analysts have been, American analysts have been suggesting.
All right, she backtracked that seriously there at the end.
Hardcore.
Where it was like, they don't want to invade, then all of a sudden they're not going to take Kiev. I agree with her. I don't think they want to run the flag up Kiev. Kiev is close. They have a lot of troops there. It's scary. And you force the enemy to have to protect Kiev to some degree, their main capital city. Huge amount of peoples live there, so that they don't have as much trouble for whatever they want to do. What they want to do is create a stable country. They have this whole new portion, Crimea. They took it. It went great. Why not? It's just... Here, I'm going to say, I don't know. This is going to sound sort of knee-jerk and weird, maybe. It's just not a time for experts. It's a time for Imagineers, right? Like, you have someone who's obviously done this a long time. She's very smart, but she is locked in. It's always been like this, and it's never been like this.
This
when
is
quite
exactly
literally, we just saw him take territory from Ukraine with very little effort, very little pushback. And why wouldn't you go the rest of the way?
Okay, so I'm so glad you say this, because this is exactly what I wanted to lead into, which is, I feel like in the U.S., and you're American, you get this. There's two trains of thought. On one hand, you have the establishment, Democrats in particular, but establishment Republicans too. But let's talk about the Democrats, who are like Russia, 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 Russia. But they're so out of touch with their own people and concerned about like suffocating the working class and staying in power through those means, that they don't understand that's creating the openings for the right to empower essentially Russian interests, whether or not they're in bed with them or not is a whole other story. Simultaneously, you have the left, who's so effing concerned about the establishment Democrats that there's no way they want to, much of the left doesn't even want to take into account what's actually happening in the real geopolitical world. And so you have this conundrum here in the States in which we shouldn't trust the establishment for winning, let's say, but there is some truth to what's actually happening on the ground. But because of it's like
crying wolf. I mean, I think we are on the same, we are both towards the center of this argument, but on opposite sides somewhat, like not opposite sides, but like I'm a Russiagate skeptic. Like, I think they did some influence, but like, what are you going to do? Like, no more than any other country does to any other country in some ways.
My theory is
but
this happens in every country, but it happened.
Oh, yeah. But it's the same thing with like NSA and stuff. It's like, unique to now every country does it. Does it matter? It's like, yeah, it still matters. I don't know. But the point I was trying to make, though, is that there is an accountability on either side in the media sphere. And that I think this is the problem. And so I think we find ourselves, even if we're looking and have different agreements on here, on the inside of where the media have kind of bracketed this thing. And there has been no sort of apology for the misinformation, frankly, around, from Rachel Maddow's and people like that around how these things were happening. And there's also been no accountability for the actual actions that a lot of the worst actors in the world do on a very regular basis. And it's a problem on both sides. And people are really entrenched, and they will not have the conversation in the middle, because this is one of those situations in which there is something happening in the middle. And she, in this clip, was so quick to sort of be like, all Americans think this. And like, I'm like, as someone who has so many reservations about the narrative that was told, no, I'm here to say, just as a geopolitical observer, that I think they're going in. I think they're going in.
I mean, and then what happens? I mean, if they go in, obviously it's about oil and gas, but like, then what?
Nothing. Then they have a stable water supply in the Crimea and some things that they want. No, but then nothing. And the consequence of nothing happening is just a further degradation or acceleration, if you're excited about it, or whatever it is, of currently the tangled but very fragile web that holds the world together. There will only be so many times that the United States and Europe can make pledges for people and not show up. We're all Georgians. John McCain used to be the one who said we were all people. Then it was Joe Biden. Don't forget, that was his job in the Senate. We are all who? We are all there. We're all Afghans. We're all, and we haven't shown up for people. We are just bailing, and we have to have a new recognition of what the world will look like when that continues, and when people no longer trust us necessarily to control the sea lanes, etc. Noam Chomsky and Vijay Prashad and some other people are working on a book right now, I think, about kind of the withdrawal, kind of American withdrawal from different places, whether it be Libya, whether it be all the, everywhere, places that, we're both familiar with. I think it's interesting. I think there's enough going on that we can actually examine it critically. We used to be inside the fish tank.
This is people, the Russian, whatever, propaganda folks, whoever's like the Syria propaganda universe that's out there, hit me on Libya all the time because of my work there. But the predominant work that I did there was post Gaddafi collapse, and specifically working on with women who wanted to run for office and were writing the Constitution, whatever. And it was, but the biggest frustration that we had was, okay, so NATO bombed Libya and then did nothing. And then you had a bunch of weapons facilities. You
can actually see what happens in the absence, right? In the vacuum.
And this is exactly, this is our, we did this in Iraq, we did this in Libya, we did it in Afghanistan now. When you abandon and don't have a plan at all, the Republicans have a plan to never leave and to make money off of it and have security forces, et cetera, et cetera. But the centrist Democrats just have a plan to abandon, and civil wars break out. And
it's hard choices. It's hard choices, right? Like, can you imagine running right now on a program where you're like, it's cold in Afghanistan and we really should send food?
Oh my God. To be clear, let's explain to people. The weather is the coldest winter possibly in history in Afghanistan.
This could be the greatest humanitarian disaster ever since they've recorded things as being disasters.
Yep.
Since the Bronze Age collapse. You heard it here first.
And they're just trying to get basic aid, and they can't get access to basic aid. And,
and it's like, yeah, you're sending food to the Taliban. You're sending legitimacy to the Taliban. It's like, yeah, you are. Like, so, but otherwise a lot of people are going to die, and you kind of messed up leaving, didn't do a good job. So where does moral responsibility begin? Where does geopolitics begin? It is not simple. It's never, it is in Technicolor. Forget grayscale, right? It is in bright Technicolor.
And do you think, without going down too much of the rabbit hole of Afghanistan, that the Biden administration wasn't just about how much money was being poured into Afghanistan and being, the Afghani government, like, misusing the money and being corrupt, et cetera, but of course, in their absence, Taliban took hold way faster than probably anybody could predict. But do you have a sense that maybe, I could be completely wrong, that the Biden administration just thought, oh, okay, well, this is where you're going to have another foreign interest who also has interests in the U.S., but we've been covering the costs of stability to swoop in and make it stable. And then they just didn't do it.
What I think? I think there's a combination of things. I do think this way. Thought like one of the few things they could give progressives, if this was like a progressive issue, and the forever wars, in the kind of bumper sticker way. But I also think it's something that Joe Biden wants to leave, I think.
course.
And I think it's a separation between him and his
I think
and his team. I think his team are happy to have some corrupt people. You know what I mean? They've seen a million of these guys from Vietnam through Panama through they know they don't mind a corrupt regime that they can work with. That's not a hard thing. That's okay. But what they do mind is, being seen as cutting and running. So I think it probably took Biden in some situation room meetings being like, you know what? I said we're leaving. You guys figure it out.
But you don't think he made the argument that in the case of us leaving, oh, don't worry, China, whoever, Iran's going to come in here and they'll stabilize, probably more China. It's going to stabilize it because they put so much money into the infrastructure and they will lose too much money by not having quote unquote stability.
I am sure it was mentioned in meetings. I'm sure the countervailing argument was something about, well, then it's China's problem. And won't that be great? Because Afghanistan, when it's somebody's problem, is certainly a nice problem for someone else to have. But no, that's extremely short-sighted. As you see what has already happened with China on the African continent, they have extended their geopolitical power through extremely traditional sort of Western means. Like, certainly any American or any UK person should know, going places, bridges, tunnels, motorcycles, the arteries and veins of the nation.
That's how we started the show off. I just want to switch gears just a little bit, just a touch. This has been a very international show, and I'm really happy it has been. It wasn't the plan, and it worked out. But I know you have a lot of feelings about big tech. So was wondering, okay, David, can you play that clip from MSNBC? Big
Love
tech,
the big
yes.
tech. Bigger the techier, the better.
We know the Build Back Better Act, the president's agenda, has been put on pause, at least for the time being. Voting rights has moved to the forefront. We're going to hear from the president and the vice president on that subject in Georgia today. Preview for us, if you will, the next few big battles on Capitol Hill.
Well, there's one place of bipartisan congressional agreement, and that's on going after big tech. There's a handful of bills that are working their way through committees towards the floor that could go after the giant tech companies. There's places, one of the rare places, where leaders of both sides of the aisle on these committees that oversee big tech are in agreement with moving these forward. These are bills that would make it more difficult for giant tech companies to acquire their rivals. It would open up some of their platforms to competing processes. It would try and crack open the app stores, which are Apple, exercise a lot of control over the internet. But there's one note of caution, I would say, that Axios is coming up on 5 years old. And for the entirety of Axios' 5 years, I've been sitting on MSNBC saying there's a lot of agreement on big tech regulation. We haven't seen anything yet. So don't hold your breath. But the members who are in favor of these legislations are rushing forward to get it done this year before the August recess, before everyone turns their minds to the midterms later this fall.
So, yes, for 5 years, people have been saying tech is bad. But with that being said, like, it's really bad right now. I do feel like there's a little bit of a sea change.
Yeah, and there was a bad rebranding by Facebook for sure. Like, I just recently was like trying to fix something in an account, and the first like metaverse thing came up, and I was like, oh yeah, this is just three more points down in the polls. Yeah. Look, I think, and we've talked about this on the show before, but I think the real turning point in terms of me thinking that something is going to happen to tech is the kind of voices behind it, which are not good government voices anymore. I mean, or in addition to traditional good government voices, you actually have hardened parts of the right. And so if sort of libertarian kind of types in the Democratic Party, other folks come together, I think there are starting to be idiosyncratic alliances even inside the Congress, even inside the Senate of folks, how Rand Paul will always find somebody to come together on something, of people speaking out strongly against Facebook, Google, Twitter, and about regulating them. And then certainly Donald Trump has something to prove now, right? So should he be the nominee, this is one of those things that individual matters a little bit. He is definitely going to make it a crowning achievement, the things he is going to do to big tech to punish them for treating them bad.
But how can he win without big tech? I mean, how can they win without big tech? I mean,
they win if he wins also. That's the secret,
Explain that.
Because the amount of advertising things, the attention he draws, like everybody does better. And so, Donald Trump was a huge money benefit, right? I guess so I think big tech can afford to lose the argument even every day to Trump to make sure that they're delivering to shareholders every month.
Who do you think is in biggest trouble right now?
In terms of tech, definitely Facebook.
Yeah.
I think because not only does it present the clearest target in terms of like the most punchable face award, which Facebook definitely gets. I don't even mean Mark Zuckerberg. We would never on your program suggest violence of any kind.
No,
I was saying the company has that, but also they're so easily splittable, right? You can see exactly where you want to cut it all off and really take some kind of antitrust stuff out for a walk before you start to cover up something that starts to be complicated, like Google, where it's like the kind of beating heart of Google powers things in effective ways or ineffective ways, if you listen to some AI people. But it is sort of, there's more there in terms of less just like conglomerating the world together and making something that's too big to fail. That's what Facebook is.
So how does this make a difference? I mean, you and I have talked about this. If you remember way back in 2016 when we were sitting in the Sirius XM studios and, more naive times, we would sit there and talk about your cat socks and just what the world's going to look like moving forward in a consultantless class. But the truth is we did talk a lot about how the industry of campaigning had shifted so much for the left under Bernie because he had really, and this was built off of Howard Dean, of course, and Barack Obama, but they had really used the tools to amplify fundraising through small dollar donations in a way that no one else had. And it seemed like immediately after the Donald Trump world just took it by storm. They learned the same lessons, but they really went in a much more sophisticated way with, Cambridge Analytica and others. Do we have a path? Because it feels like we're not where we were in 2016. It's harder to get those clicks. It's harder to get.
This was the organic time, right? I mean, I think you already mentioned even the figure, but to everyone out there, however many followers you have on Facebook, only 15% of the people on there see your material organically. You have to pay for the rest. And that's just how it is. So everybody out there should know that. Because of that, right? This new situation, anytime that you ding Facebook, or Twitter, or they stop with political advertising, it helps incumbents. People have traditional means of getting the message out, and it hurts people who organize online. And so I think one of the things worth campaigning for, especially at a very local level, right? And I would call this in fun quotations, nationalize Facebook, but is to think about requiring internet providers, because they are using our bandwidth the same way it's our airways, to require them to give classifieds as a public service, the same way C-SPAN is a public service on the airwaves. Like something that's the parts of Facebook that we actually need, and it's the groups. I can tell you that is the wholesome part of Facebook.
Explain that.
Everyone wants to leave Facebook, but stays because they're like their kid. A group is not a page. A group is just a community of people. Usually it's like people in a neighborhood, around a school's a big one. Some of them around hating groups of people. I'm sure this, Facebook is still a horrible place with all kinds of things, but it's a community you can't replicate. And so you stay on Facebook and then get bombarded with advertising and all the other things that Facebook is doing, get your data scraped, whatever's happening to you on there. That's why it's happening to you. And I know that's why I probably wouldn't leave Facebook. I talk about it all the time.
Yep.
So this, it's very simple. This is not like a huge computer programming challenge for someone. It actually is a political issue, right? Is there a public utility need in being able to organize online so that people can have fundraisers for the fire departments that we don't fund other ways, and so people can fund even grassroots candidates for local office?
Right. And not just candidates for local office. Fascinating conversation as always, Arun. Arun Chaudhary is, of course, the host of the committee program and doing all things amazing abroad, fighting for the left against the far right that is literally taking over. Just your weekly reminder that they're coming for us and we got to do something. Get your act together. Go run for office.
That's true.
Do what you can. You don't have to be some sort of
be a campaign
figure.
Manager. Everyone wants to run for office. Aspire to be a campaign manager. I think it's a better thing to aspire to be.
We need both. Run. I love everyone running for Congress, but run for school board, run for town council.
Yeah.
It's achievable. You don't have to raise $1 million, and that's where the right wing is really doing it. David is going to kill me by the end of this because I keep saying the same thing over and over. I'm going to be a broken record. Run for something and find someone to run your campaign, or vice versa. Find a great candidate. We got to get it's just There's no infrastructure. The Democratic Party has just been like asleep at the wheel. Out to
and repeating
lunch.
the message is okay. Repeating the message is okay, but just don't repeat it in the same way every time. You know, one time you're saying it casually to David, like, you know what I was saying before, people running for office. Then one time it's right down the hatch, you know, one time it's to a guest. And that way you don't have listener fatigue.
I think I've been doing that. I feel like I'm on.
Good.
David, do you want to chime in? Has that been happening? Is that how we've been? I mean, Arun's the expert. Decent, he said.
Repeat, but in different voice. Yeah.
Okay,
you have 5 different voices as a public opinion. Yeah.
I don't know what my 5 different. Okay, I do. I know I do. I have.
No, they're all the same. You can speak to. You can have an actual conversation in real life. God forbid. Okay. You can do an interview. You can do a press conference. You can do a direct to camera down the hatch, or you can do a speech.
What's down the hatch for folks who don't know what that means?
Oh, you know, well, we begin bombing Russia in 5 minutes, whatever Reagan said when he was just warming up, right? You know, you're in the Oval Office, you're looking right down the barrel of the camera.
And then there's like the off the record one. That's like the
that's the casual. That's the casual. That's sort of what we added in 2008, right? It was like, so you used to have 4 ways to talk to the public in audiovisual. Now you have 5. That's measurably better, right? That is a huge percentage better when you add that over of 2 years of messaging.
What about like Twitter and Facebook and all that? Is that the 6th way or is that different?
That is, I mean, that's not the actual person speaking. That's just, I think, replicating what they've already done.
Okay, fair enough. I'm liking this. All right, so hey guys, think about running for office. Go run for school board. Google it for 5 minutes. Get hyped up. Figure out who you think is the best person to organize your campaign. Look into it. Like, who's the most organized person you know who cares about the issues? They're your campaign manager. And then sign up.
And one last thing that I would say about that is ask a busy person for help, because busy people are busy because they do things. Someone who is free to help you is free for an important reason. They don't do things.
Damn. That was like some therapy right there for me. Awesome. Arun Chaudhary, always a pleasure.
Yeah.
Say hi to everyone for me. Love the desk setup. You look very busy. I broke my mouse. I just saw you grab your mouse. I broke my mouse yesterday. I just had to order a new one. Not good.
Man.
All right. You the best. Thank you. And to everybody else, if you are not already, please join us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/The Nomi Key Show. That is how we run the trains. I don't really like saying run the trains. There's got to be something else. There's got to be another term. That is how shit gets done. You know, we make the show happen from wherever I am, from wherever everybody else is. It runs in Germany. Ben's in he's in Atlanta, in Georgia, and I'm in Puerto Rico, or I'm at home or whatever, but mainly here right now. That's where I'm doing it. So this happens because we've got amazing patrons, incredible patrons. I'm just gonna say it. We got the best patrons. We've got the best patrons. Bob B is a new patron. Dee Ruff, thank you so much. Subscribe to us on Twitch. You can join us on Twitch too. Marty C59 cheered. Thank you so much, Marty. This is Jodel Law with Jodel Law. I think that's it. Also, thank you so much. And Pagan Communist has been a subscriber for over 7 months. I want to give you a shout out. Thank you to everybody. If you are already not subscribed to us on YouTube, on Twitch, please do so. If you can do all of them, thank you. It's like we're fighting the algorithm, so we got to do what we can. Please join us on patreon.com/The Nomi Key Show. Become a patron if you can. It keeps us going. And in the meantime, we will see you on Friday for Femme Friday, and stay in solidarity.
The Nomi Key Show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomi Key Show.